Welcome to Recovery Unplugged. And today I want to address a subject that we could spend weeks on. Not that on any of these that we wouldn't be able to spend weeks. But I want to deal with the issue of mental health and faith. I don't know if you know, but October 10th was National Mental Health Awareness Day. And October is National Depression Month. And so I talked about depression before. I kind of want to take the next 2 times that I do this podcast, and I want to address mental health and faith. It is kind of a big controversial, maybe hot topic sometimes in the church, and I just want to look at it from maybe a biblical perspective. Today I'm going to address just the stigma of mental health. I'm going to give you some information on understanding maybe mental health, a good definition, and then some of a biblical perspective of how we and where we see mental health issues in the Bible. And the next time we meet, then we'll talk more about the role of faith and the role of the church when it comes to mental health, and we being the church. So what is our role to those that are struggling? And another reason we deal with this topic is because in addiction, more often than not, mental health issues and struggles happen all at the same time. And so it is sometimes the cause of more addiction problems, and sometimes the addiction problems cause some more of the mental health issues. So it's a good topic to think about and address. Always, have to do some statistics because I want you to understand the depth of it. Think of it this way: 1 in 5 adults in the United States, that's like 43.8 million people, experience mental health issues in a given year. 1 in 5 adults. So just look down your block, look around at the people you know. 1 in 5 adults. 1 in 25 adults in the U.S. experience serious mental health issues. The ones that actually limit their ability to function, do major life activities, maybe work, be in healthy relationships. 18.1% of adults struggle with anxiety, and 8% of adults struggle with depression, the 2 most common mental health issues that strike the United States. So what does this mean for you, your church? Look around. Many of the people sitting in the pews with you, Bible studies with you, they are struggling silently, potentially, with this issue. Often it's silent because of the stigma the faith community may have put on it. The fact that it's one of those issues people just don't know what to say or how to react or respond, so it's kept silent. There's a lot of shame involved for so many. Lifeway did a research with Focus on the Family, and they found out by studying 1,000 senior pastors in Protestant churches that 3 out of 4 pastors said they know at least one family member, friend, or congregant who is diagnosed with bipolar disorder. 75% said they knew someone diagnosed with clinical depression. And 57% said they knew at least 3 people who fell into that category that they personally knew. And so, unfortunately, though, in the process of getting that information, they found a real disconnect between what the pastors knew about mental health and the experience they might have with it, and how they were actually proactively dealing with it and addressing it in the church. And so that's one of the reasons why we're talking about it, because can't heal what we keep in silence and secret. Stigma. I love this for mental health awareness kind of poster that I found, but think of it, have you ever heard these terms? Suck it up. You go to therapy? What, are you crazy? Oh, you're just overly sensitive, or, you're weak-minded, or, well, others are worse off than you are. I don't know why you're feeling sorry for yourself. Or maybe they've just said, hey, I can't handle you. You're too much. Maybe people have said to you, you're bringing us down. Stop bringing us down. Those are just some of the stigmas that you may have heard. And that's hard to walk through and to respond to. And if you're one of those people, then I really feel bad, and I'm sorry that you have had to experience that. Maybe your faith has been discounted because you struggle with mental health. Maybe they've said things like, you should pray more. Well, maybe you've sinned, and maybe you're not right with God. Those are tough things, but those are common responses some people have. But let me tell you, those are lies from the enemy. And those lies are to keep you trapped and to keep you doubting your God and keeping you distant from the one person that can heal you and help you walk through this and deepen your faith at the same time. Singer and songwriter Jennifer Knapp said, "I have experienced the best and worst of faith-based responses to my mental health. At its worst, I have experienced utter rejection from the church. Other times, I've been counseled to absorb my sufferings as a punishment for my sins and a call to repentance." That's difficult if you've heard those words. If someone has ever said them to you, I hope that you listen and hear that that's not what God says to you. How do we actually define mental health? The World Health Organization defines it as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and be a contributing factor to his or her community. So we all have a mental health status. We should all be able to talk about where we are in our own personal mental health, because it affects how we think, how we feel about ourselves, how we interpret events, how we learn, how we cope with life events, and how we develop and sustain relationships. Mental health is not just for 1, 2, or 1 out of 5. Mental health is something each one of us deals with. The Diagnostic Statistical Manual that people like me are always told about and talked about defines mental illness based on behavioral characteristics, the way that we function outside of normal. So unfortunately, although we all have mental health and we all have to deal with what we think and believe and how we function and cope, it's usually only those outside of what we call normal that we begin to label and define as wrong. The Mayo Clinic says mental illness refers to a wide range of mental health conditions, disorders that affect your mood, your thinking, and your behavior. Most of us, many people, have mental health concerns from time to time, but a mental health concern becomes a mental illness when ongoing signs and symptoms cause frequent stress and affect the ability to function. Which is why I want to talk about this, because we all deal with it from time to time, and it's the ability to reach out and get help then that will enable you to walk through it, and it won't take you to a point of inability to function. Matthew Stanford, who is a Christian psychologist, wrote a book called Grace for the Afflicted, and he's done a lot of work to really bring to light mental illness in the Christian community. He defines mental health as a disorder of the brain resulting in the disruption of a person's thoughts, feelings, moods, and ability to relate to others, severe enough to require psychological or psychiatric interventions. In other words, it goes to a point beyond our ability personally to cope, and we need outside help. Of all those definitions, where do we find agreement? It's impaired life functioning. It's clearly significant, and outside help is needed. And I think if we just stop there, then we can probably all agree that that's not a bad definition. But often when we talk about mental health, it's not the experience, it's the intensity of the experience or the duration of the experience that matters to each one of us. Unfortunately, there's a lot of places where mental health in today's community and society differ. Cause of impairment, everybody's got a different belief in how and why. What the role of genetics play in it. Some believe it's only the brain. Some people will say it's permanent. Is it permanent? Is it curable? Can you get over it? We fight it and we throw out the words like syndrome or disease. And then the question of exactly how to manage our mental health status. Brad Hamburg, who also works out of a church in North Carolina, he writes, mental health is a life struggle, which is common to all people to some degree, that significantly and persistently impairs an individual's mental, social, and emotional ability to function. Mental illness can have its cause in the physical body, environmental causes, personal choices, or a combination of all of the above. And outside help is going to be needed for soul and body physician to assist in the healing process. So think of these key points if we think about a healthy definition of mental illness. It's common to all people. You're not alone. The degree of impact, some sort of impairment. There's going to be a significant struggle in some way. Maybe you could say you're going to have a thorn, like Paul talked about, that just stays there and continues to irritate. Duration of influence. It may last longer than you want it to last. It's outside of who you are as a person. It's things that change you and your people see you differently, but it's not who you are. Your personality and your aptitudes, they stay intact. There is no one universal cause. Don't let anyone ever decide that this is the reason or that is the reason. There are so many different reasons and causes. And multiple helpers. Mental health is an area where lots of different people need to come around and create a community around you to walk through this. And I just want to say, fear not. God is not silent. The Bible has everything to say about mental illness. And people that struggle with mental health issues, they need the gospel the same as anyone else. The gospel is salvation to all. No one is exempt. And we know the God who is the God who heals, the God who sees, the God who understands, and the God who knows. So no matter what the cause, no treatment of mental health struggles will ever be complete without the gospel front and center as part of the healing process. Which is why I challenge the church and those of us Christians to be the ones that embrace those that struggle, because God is the one who helps. I don't have time to go through all these biblical examples, but I'm just going to throw some out there so you can see, if you know anything and you can study some mental health disorders. Nebuchadnezzar is a significant illustration of someone with schizoid affective disorder. The Gadarene demonic, he had disorganized thinking and speech. And so when we look at even both of those, God actively pursued Nebuchadnezzar, and Jesus himself placed himself in position to encounter the man with the demons and the legions of demons. Same way, he longs for a relationship with us, no matter what our mental status is. Saul, if you study Saul, many people say that he had bipolar and related disorders. He had manic episodes, he had inflated self-esteem, he was anxious and distressed, he had problems with concentration, he had feelings of worthlessness and guilt, he had appetite issues. But David cared for Saul in a way that was a response to his madness rather than stigmatized him. So when you think of King Saul, make sure we got the right Saul here. When we think about King Saul, think about how David cared for him and calmed him and soothed him and even gave him all the respect he needed in spite of who Saul was. There's no better example of depressive disorder than David. His Psalms tell of all of his struggles, of his moods, of his ups and downs, his highs and lows, his fatigue, his energy, at times his feeling and thoughts of death and hopelessness. But David found relief from that suffering in God. And God called David a man after his own heart and appointed him king of his people. Anxiety disorders. The Bible describes physical and emotional conditions of anxiety. Psalm 94:19, "And the multitude of my anxieties within me, your comforts delight my soul." Psalm 55, "My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen upon me. Fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me." Proverbs 12:25, "Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad." Trauma and stress, that's a whole nother topic, really, all of these are, but, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, Jacob, following the presumed death of Joseph, you go back and read his story, there were so many things about Jacob that screamed that he did not deal well with that and was emotionally not in a good state. David Brooks says, trauma is an explosive cataclysm of the soul, down deep inside. And you only have to look next to Job and you see that all that happened to him created distress, nightmares, flashbacks, avoidance, depression, shame, detached and alone, loss of joy, anger, no rest, or quietness of his soul and the inability to sleep, all characteristics of PTSD. Additional illustrations. Samson, you want to have some fun? People say he had antisocial personality disorder. Gomer, considered borderline personality disorder. Nabal, he had a brain injury. He had a stroke. God killed him through a brain injury. Zacharias, he had speech and language problems that emotionally came upon him. And King Solomon dealt with dementia in his older years. But none of those things disqualified them from a relationship with God or service to God. Because God used their mistakes, their poor decisions to draw them closer to himself. God's will is sovereign, not the enemy, not our physical bodies, not the hurts or the wounds or the struggles that we face. And restoration and redemption is completely possible. Matthew Stanford again wrote, mental health is no respecter of faith. Simply being a person of faith, even exemplary faith, as in the case of Job, is not enough to keep one from struggling from mental health problems. Charles Spurgeon, known to have struggled with deep depression, said the mind can descend far lower than the body, for in it there are bottomless pits. The flesh can bear only a certain number of wounds and no more. But the soul can bleed in 10,000 ways and die over and over again each hour. 2 Peter tells us, his divine power has given us everything required for life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Aren't you glad for that? No matter what life throws at you, no matter where you struggle, you don't have to be stigmatized. You don't have to live by a label. God calls you to him, loves you, has a purpose for you, and has a design for your life and a healing. I love this version of Matthew 11, and this is God's invitation to you. Are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-filling on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Keep company. Come to God. He will embrace you. He will love you. He will walk you through this. He will not reject you. He will not cast you aside. He longs for that relationship, no matter what. Let any mental health struggle lead you to people to lead them to Christ, or lead you to Christ so that you can find comfort, help, and strength at all times.